Sometimes the dead just need someone to listen. That is what Chaplain Mark always believed. For over 20 years, he served the hospital with quiet dedication, offering prayers, comfort, and calm words to patients and families in their darkest hours. He had seen grief in every form, people pleading with God, people angry at God, people who had already given up, and through it all, he remained steady. He had a soft voice, gentle eyes, and a habit of whispering prayers even when he was alone. The hospital chapel was his second home, small, dimly lit, and always cold. It held a silence that felt peaceful to most, but not always, not since the confessional booth had been locked. That booth had been sealed years ago, after an incident no one liked to talk about. A psychiatric patient had wandered in during the night, sat inside the booth, and suffered a violent seizure. The nurses said he screamed scripture before he died, something about the devil waiting for him. After that, the confessional was closed, but Chaplain Mark, ever respectful, still bowed slightly each time he passed it. One rainy night, he stayed late at the hospital. A young girl had died during surgery, and her mother was inconsolable. Mark prayed with her for over an hour, then made his way to the chapel to pray alone before heading home. The hallway was quiet, the lights flickered slightly, and a mop bucket stood forgotten by the janitor's closet. Mark lit a candle, opened his Bible, and began to pray in a whisper. The storm outside tapped softly against the stained glass windows. The air felt heavier than usual, like something was listening. After a while, he closed his Bible and leaned back, rubbing his tired eyes. That was when he heard it. A whisper, soft, so soft that for a moment he thought it had come from inside his own head. But then it came again. Mark. It was coming from the confessional booth. He froze. The booth had been locked for years. He had never once heard a sound from it, never seen anyone near it, and yet that voice had come from inside. He slowly stood up, heart beginning to thump harder. "Is someone in there?" he asked, trying to sound calm. No answer. He walked to the booth. The light above it was flickering gently. He reached for the handle, still locked. He backed away. Maybe he imagined it. Maybe the late hours were playing tricks on his mind. He turned back toward the pews, and that was when he heard it again. Mark. Louder this time, like someone was crouched just inside the booth, mouth to the thin wooden screen. He rushed to the sacristy, where the chapel keys were stored. His hands trembled slightly as he searched through the ring of keys. He found the old brass one, labeled confessional, and made his way back. The booth stood there, still and silent. He inserted the key and turned it slowly. As the door creaked open, the smell hit him first. Damp wood, dust, and something else underneath, like something had rotted a long time ago and had never fully been cleaned. The inside of the booth was empty, just the small bench and the narrow window with the mesh screen. No one was there. Mark stepped inside, feeling oddly cold. He sat down and stared through the screen. The other side was dark. He reached out, touched the opposite door, locked from the inside. He began to whisper a prayer, more out of habit than need, but halfway through, he heard it again. The voice, except this time, it was whispering back, repeating the prayer with him, word for word. He stopped, and the voice kept going, finishing the prayer alone. When it ended, there was a deep silence. Then the voice whispered again, "Do you believe God forgives everyone?" Mark stumbled out of the booth, nearly dropping his Bible. He turned around and slammed the door shut, locking it quickly. The air felt wrong now, thick, charged. He hurried toward the chapel exit, but the lights flickered violently and then went out completely. The chapel was swallowed in darkness. Only the small candle he had lit remained, casting dancing shadows on the walls. From behind him, the voice came again. "He did not forgive me." Mark turned, candlelight flickering across the old wooden booth. It was still locked, still closed, but now something was different. The candlelight glinted off something inside the mesh window, eyes watching him. He stepped back, breath caught in his throat. Then the voice whispered again, softer this time. "I confessed, but no one listened." Mark ran. He did not look back. He reached the hallway and found the lights still working there. A nurse passing by gave him a startled look. He did not say anything, just walked away quickly. That night, he stayed awake in bed, going over everything. The voice, the smell, the eyes. By morning, he had convinced himself it was just exhaustion, a moment of stress, but he still went back. During daylight, he opened the confessional again. It was empty. No eyes, no smell, just dust and silence. He locked it again and reported nothing, but the chapel never felt the same. After that, every night he returned, he could feel something watching, and sometimes when the hospital was quiet enough, he could hear it, whispering prayers, always the same ones he had spoken, like something had learned them. 2 weeks later, a janitor cleaning the chapel during the night ran out screaming. He claimed he saw someone sitting inside the locked booth, a pale man, mouth moving, eyes hollow. The staff dismissed it, called it a hallucination, stress, lack of sleep, but Chaplain Mark knew better. He began digging into the old patient records. He found the name, Gregory Lane, age 37. A man who claimed demons spoke to him in the walls, who begged daily for someone to hear his confession, who died alone in that booth while whispering Psalm 51, "Have mercy on me, O God." Mark sat down that night and prayed for him, for real this time, a full prayer, start to finish, no interruptions. When he finished, the chapel felt lighter for a moment. But then came the voice again, just a whisper, too late. Now Mark only prays during the day, and he never looks toward the confessional booth. After dark, he knows something is still in there, something that was never forgiven, something that was never heard. And each time he passes by, he hears that same voice, barely audible, scratching through the silence like a fingernail across wood. Are you listening now? The dying never lie, and sometimes neither do the dead. That was what Chaplain Ellis's mentor used to say, a phrase he never truly understood until that day on the field. He had spent nearly 8 years in uniform, walking through the blood and chaos of war zones, offering prayers where doctors had run out of hope. He had held trembling hands, wiped away tears, and whispered final words to the unconscious, but he had never been truly afraid, not until he met Private Thomas Laird. It was a dry afternoon, the kind where the sky looked bleached from the heat, and the ground crunched underfoot. They had just pulled back from a firefight, and a medic waved him over to a young soldier lying on a stretcher behind a half-destroyed tent. Shrapnel had torn through his lower chest. The others knew he would not last the hour, so Chaplain Ellis knelt beside him, opened his prayer book, and prepared to do what he had done so many times before: offer peace where there was pain, offer comfort where there was fear, also comfort where there was fear. At first it went as usual. The soldier's eyes fluttered open and closed, his breathing shallow. Ellis held his hand and began to pray. He had memorized the words long ago, the same phrases, the same rhythm. His voice was low and steady, meant to calm the soul slipping away. But about halfway through, something strange happened. He heard another voice. At first he thought it was the medic whispering behind him, but when he glanced back, the medic had walked away to grab supplies. He kept praying, but now he could hear it clearly. Another voice, deep and broken, speaking the same prayer in unison. Every word matched perfectly, like a second voice inside his own head. But it was not inside. It was right behind him, right over his shoulder. He turned around fast. Nothing, just empty space, and a rusted ammo box. But the voice had been there, clear as anything. For a moment he thought maybe it was the soldier himself, muttering along. But when he looked back, Private Laird's lips were barely moving. The voice he had heard was stronger, older, sadder. Still he finished the prayer. When he said Amen, the second voice did too. Then silence, heavy and full, the kind of silence that feels like it is watching you. The soldier was still alive, but just barely. Ellis leaned closer to comfort him, and that was when the young man said something that made his blood freeze. "He is here, sir, my brother. I can feel him, right behind you." Chaplain Ellis blinked. The words were too sharp, too clear for someone so close to death. He asked the soldier to explain, and through a raspy whisper, Laird said his older brother, Daniel, had died in a similar attack 6 months ago. Same unit, same field, same prayer. Ellis remembered that name. He had done the last rites for Daniel too, back in the winter, when the earth was still soft, and the bombs had been falling every hour. He remembered how cold Daniel's hand was, and how his eyes stared through him like they had already seen too much. Now his younger brother was saying he was here. Ellis stood up, and took a few steps away. Shaken, he whispered another prayer under his breath, trying to calm himself. Then for a moment, the air around him changed. The heat seemed to pull back. A cold breeze swept past him, dry and sudden. And then he heard it again, the same voice, but this time, it did not repeat the prayer. It said one word, "Wait." He spun around. Nothing. Again just dust and wind and silence. But the voice had sounded desperate, not angry, not evil, just full of longing. He went back to the soldier, and asked what he meant when he said his brother was there. Laird looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. "He never got to say goodbye, sir. He told me in my dream last night. He said he was stuck, waiting for someone to hear him." Ellis tried to respond, but his throat felt dry. The memory of Daniel's lifeless eyes came back to him, and then it clicked. The prayer. During Daniel's last rites, the prayer had been interrupted by gunfire, and Ellis had rushed away before finishing it. It had always haunted him a little, leaving a man mid-blessing, but now he wondered if that small act had opened something. The soldier began to shake. His body was failing. Ellis dropped to his knees and held his hand again, trying to keep him present. And then from behind him, a presence. He did not hear it. He felt it, like someone was kneeling beside him. No footsteps, no sound, just that weight, like grief pressing down. And then as Ellis began the prayer again, the second voice returned. This time it did not echo him. It spoke alongside him. 2 prayers, different words, but both seeking peace. The voice spoke faster than him, desperate, and then at the end, it simply said, "Thank you," and it was gone. The air warmed again. The silence softened. The soldier opened his eyes one last time, and smiled faintly. "He is gone now, sir. He is free." Then he slipped away, peaceful, silent, still. After the burial, Chaplain Ellis walked alone back to the field tent. He sat in the dark for hours, Bible on his lap, hands cold. He had heard voices before. Grief does strange things, but this had been different. This had not come from inside his head. It had come from the space right beside him. A brother, waiting for someone to hear him. A prayer, unfinished for too long. That night, Ellis wrote down every word of the experience in his journal, locked it away, and never spoke of it again. But even now, when he prays for the dying, he always finishes every single word, slowly, clearly, no matter what is happening around him, because he knows what happens when you leave a prayer unfinished. Sometimes the soul waits, and sometimes it whispers. Some souls do not want peace. They just want to be remembered. That was what Chaplain Roy had been told by the senior warden on his first day at the penitentiary. He had worked at hospitals and nursing homes before, but prison was different. The air felt thicker, like it remembered every scream that had ever echoed off the stone walls. He had learned to keep his steps steady, his voice calm, and his prayers short. Most inmates never looked him in the eye. Some laughed during the blessings, a few wept, but the part that always stayed with him was the morgue. Hidden in the far corner of the old wing, it had not been used in years, except when a body needed to be kept for identification. He had only gone there a handful of times, mostly when someone had died without family, and he was asked to say a few final words. He never liked it, but he believed no soul should be forgotten. That was why he went back that night. It had been a rough week. 2 overdoses, a suicide, and a stabbing. The chapel had been filled with fear and tension. Even the guards had grown quieter, keeping their eyes on corners more than usual. So Chaplain Roy, hoping to find some quiet, told the guard at post that he was going to the old morgue to pray. The man gave him a strange look, almost like he wanted to say something, but just nodded and buzzed open the gate. The hallway leading to the morgue always smelled like mold and bleach. The walls were yellowed with time, and the light flickered just enough to keep your nerves alert. Roy unlocked the heavy door and stepped inside. It was cold, even in the summer. A single body drawer had been used that week for an unidentified man who had died in the infirmary. No one had come to claim him. No name, just a number. Roy placed his Bible on the steel table, said a quiet prayer for the man, and began to read from the Psalms. At first, it felt calm, lonely, yes, but calm. But halfway through, he felt something change. The air got colder, as if something unseen had crept in behind him. Then he heard it, a faint sound, like metal scraping the ground. He stopped reading. It came again, a soft, slow drag, almost like chains. He turned quickly, expecting to see the guard had come in, maybe dragging something across the floor, but the room was empty. Nothing had moved. He went back to reading, slower this time, trying to shake off the feeling. But then the sound came again, closer now. Chains, no doubt about it, dragging across the floor just outside the door. He stepped toward it, opened it, and looked down the hallway. Empty, but the sound had been there. He stood still, listening hard. Silence, until something moved just past the corner of his eye. A shadow, slipping just beyond the light. He blinked. It had been fast, but it was real. He stayed still for a long moment, unsure what to do. Finally, he returned to the table, finished the prayer, and closed his Bible. As he reached for the door to leave, he heard it again, but this time, inside the room, the chains, slow, scraping, right behind him. He spun around, heart pounding, and for just a second, he saw it, a shape, man-sized, wrapped in shadow, shackled wrists, a face hidden in dark, but the outline was clear. Then it vanished, gone like smoke. The lights flickered violently, then held steady. The air grew heavy again. Roy backed out of the room and slammed the door shut. He walked fast, nearly ran, all the way back to the security desk. The guard noticed his face and stood up. Roy asked him if anyone else had been in that hallway. The guard shook his head. No one had access but Roy and himself. Then he paused, glanced around, and lowered his voice. "That room used to be something else before it was a morgue," he said. "Back in the 70s, before regulations changed, it was solitary, the worst kind. No light, no air, just chains and cold. Roy felt sick. The guard continued. There was one guy, name was Barrett, did something awful on the outside, real disturbed. They used to keep him in there for months, chained to the wall, said he would scream about shadows talking to him. Then one day, he just stopped screaming, found him dead, shackles still on. They turned it into a morgue after that. Roy could barely sleep that night. The face he saw kept coming back, the way it lingered, not angry, just there, waiting. He decided to go back the next day. This time, he brought holy water. He sprinkled it in the corners, said prayers louder, clearer. He read psalms for the dead and for the damned, but the air stayed heavy. The sound never returned, but the cold did. Every time he stepped inside that room, afterward, he felt it, a chill that never left. He began to leave small notes for the forgotten souls, words of comfort, hope, even if no one read them. He felt it mattered. Months later, another guard pulled him aside, said he had heard the chains too, while locking up, asked Roy what he thought it meant. Roy looked him in the eye and said, "Some spirits just want to be seen." He was chained and forgotten, and he is still there because no one ever remembered him as human. That night, Roy held a small service in the chapel, just him and a single candle. He said the man's name out loud, Barrett. He prayed for his soul, and afterwards something changed. The next time he walked into the morgue, the cold was gone. The air felt still, but not heavy, peaceful, and he knew, deep in his bones, the soul had been waiting for that one final act. Now every time he prays for the dead, Chaplain Roy remembers the sound of those chains, the scraping, the shadow, and he always says one extra prayer for the ones who died alone, unheard and unseen, because some ghosts do not want to scare you. They just want you to remember they were here, and once you do, they can finally rest. Sometimes, the burden of silence is heavier than sin itself. That was something Father Marcus often reminded himself during late nights at the small chapel where he had served for over 15 years. It was not a large church, not the kind with painted ceilings or golden crosses, but it was quiet, warm, and open 24 hours for anyone who needed peace. The confessional was rarely used anymore. Most people preferred to speak openly now, or not at all. Still, he kept it clean and unlocked, out of respect for tradition. He had always believed that when someone came to confess, they should not be turned away. So when the wooden door creaked open just past midnight, and a soft broken voice asked if he had time, he said yes without hesitation. The woman's voice trembled as she entered the confessional. She said her name was Clara, and that she had come to confess something terrible. Father Marcus asked her to speak freely, and she began to sob quietly. Through the sobs, she told him that years ago, she had given birth in secret, ashamed and alone. She said the baby had cried so loud that she panicked and left it at the steps of an old building. She never went back. She did not know if the child had lived or died. She said she tried to move on, but had dreams every night of a baby crying somewhere in the dark. Then her voice dropped lower. She said the baby had started calling her name, not with words, but in her head, like a voice made of wind and shadow. At that moment, Father Marcus leaned closer, but the space had gone silent. He waited, thinking she was trying to collect herself, but after several minutes, he said her name again. No reply. He stepped out and checked the other side of the booth, but it was empty. He thought maybe she had left quietly, ashamed or scared. He walked to the chapel doors, checked the pews, and even peeked outside. No sign of her. The church was still, the doors locked from the inside, just as they had been all night. He returned to the confessional, confused, and opened the door fully. It was completely empty. No sound, no movement, no trace of anyone ever sitting there. He felt a strange chill creep up his neck. Something about her voice still rang in his ears, like it had not been carried by her mouth, but straight into his mind. He sat for a long while in the silence, whispering a prayer for peace, but the unease stayed with him. Just to be sure, he walked to the back office where the security monitor was kept. A single camera watched the front entrance. He rewound the footage to around midnight and hit play. For several minutes, there was nothing. Then, at the exact moment, he remembered hearing her voice. The confessional door on the video swung open slowly. No one walked in, no one walked out. The door simply opened by itself, stayed open for a moment, then closed again, just as slowly. Father Marcus froze. He replayed it again and again, even checked the hallway camera. Still nothing. No sign of a woman, no figure, just the door moving by itself. A chill gripped his spine, and he reached for the phone to call the archdiocese, but stopped himself. Who would believe him? Instead, he went back to the booth and sat in the same seat. He whispered a prayer for Clara, whoever or whatever she was. Then he did something he had never done before. He spoke into the empty booth. He told the woman that she was forgiven, that God still loved her, that if she had passed on she could rest now. For a week, nothing happened. The church was calm again, but on the seventh night, just before closing, the janitor came to Father Marcus, pale and shaken. He said he had heard crying coming from the confessional, not loud, but soft and steady, like a baby. Father Marcus hurried to the booth, but it was empty again. That night, he checked the tapes before bed. Same thing. The door opened by itself, no one inside, and just faintly, in the background of the video, was the sound of crying. Not a woman, a child, a baby. Over the next few weeks, strange things began to happen in the chapel. Candles would flicker out without wind, books would fall from shelves with no one near, and always the confessional door would move on its own every night. At the same time, the crying would come and go, sometimes far away, sometimes so close that he could feel it in his chest. Determined to understand, Father Marcus visited the city records. He searched for missing children, abandoned babies, anything connected to the name Clara. After hours of digging, he found an old report from over 20 years ago. A newborn had been found in a box behind an old apartment building. The child had died from exposure. The mother had never been found, but the person who found the baby had written one detail in the report that made his heart stop. The box had a name carved into the wood, Clara. From that night on, Father Marcus began leaving a small toy in the confessional, sometimes a blanket, sometimes a candle, and always a whispered prayer. He no longer feared the voice. He understood now. The woman had come not to scare him, but to beg for peace. He still hears her sometimes, faint and fading, whispering her sorrow, and the baby too, crying softer now, as if the pain is growing distant. He leaves the booth open at night, now no longer closed, as if inviting the forgotten to rest, because he knows some souls do not want revenge. They do not want to haunt. They just want someone to say they are sorry, someone to say their name. And now, every time a stranger steps into the chapel and sits in silence, Father Marcus watches with care, because sometimes the lost return not to be seen, but to be heard one last time. Sometimes the dead just want to be remembered. Sometimes they will do anything to make sure they are. That was the thought that echoed in Chaplain Harris's mind long after everything had ended, long after the chapel had reopened and the renovation was declared complete. It had started as a quiet assignment. The church was old, with cracked wooden beams and dusty pews, and had been closed off for repairs while the rest of the grounds remained in use. Harris was told to simply check in once a day, say a prayer, and make sure no trespassers or vandals had gotten inside. He liked the silence. It felt sacred. At first, the only sounds were the creaks of wood and the distant hum of construction work outside. Then one evening, as he stood near the altar, he noticed a single candle that had been left behind on the brass stand. He blew it out gently and turned to leave. When he returned the next night, it was lit again. He figured it was a mistake. Maybe a worker or caretaker had come in behind him. So he blew it out once more, this time making sure he was the last person to lock up. It happened again the next night. The same candle, still burning. This time, he walked the entire chapel, room to room, calling out, thinking someone might be playing a prank. But no one answered. He waited an hour, watching the candle closely. Nothing happened. No wind, no tricks. He left and returned again, just before midnight, expecting to find it out. But it was lit again. It made no sense. The building had no power running through it yet, no staff scheduled at that hour, and Harris had all the keys. That night, he asked the renovation team if any of them had gone in late or stayed behind. They all said no. One of them joked about ghosts. Another told him the place gave him the creeps, especially after dark. Harris laughed along with them, but he felt a small chill settle in his chest. After the fifth night of the candle relighting itself, Harris decided to set up a camera from the small office tucked behind the altar. It was an old system, but it still worked, and he aimed it directly at the candle stand. The camera had motion sensors and would only record when something moved. He set it, locked up, and left. The next morning, he checked the footage. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the camera triggered. A shadow moved across the frame. Not a trick of the light, not dust or a flicker. A full shape, tall and hunched, kneeling slowly at the altar. No face, no features, just a dark figure, as if the shadow itself had taken form. It stayed still for several minutes, then the candle lit by itself, flame growing without a hand or match. The figure vanished as the flame burned bright. Harris stared at the screen, heart pounding. He rewound it again and again. The timestamp was clear. Every night, 3:33 a.m. He brought the footage to the church board. They dismissed it as a technical glitch. One even accused him of staging it for attention, but Harris knew what he saw. He knew what he felt, so he returned again. This time with a Bible in one hand and a crucifix in the other. He sat quietly near the back pew and waited. He watched the candle. Hours passed, nothing, but when his phone screen hit 3:33 a.m., he felt the air shift, heavy, cold, like something ancient had just entered the room. The candle lit, slowly, quietly, the flame rising with no sound, no spark. He could not move. He felt something behind him, just past the edge of sight, a breath on the back of his neck. But when he turned, nothing was there. Only the candle burning strong. The next day, he returned to the archives, digging through old church records. He found something buried in a forgotten folder, a report from 1972. A fire had broken out during a late-night prayer session. Only one man had been inside, a monk named Elias, who was known to pray through the night. They found his body near the altar, kneeling, hands still folded. He had died of smoke inhalation. His last journal entry mentioned a strange dream about lighting a single candle at 3:33 a.m. to ward off a darkness he could not name. No one had ever explained how the fire started. The altar had been untouched by flames. Only the monk had burned. Harris sat with that knowledge for hours. It felt like something holy had become trapped, something that needed release. So he returned to the chapel one last time. Just before 3 a.m., he placed a new candle beside the old one. This time he did not blow it out. He sat quietly and prayed. Not just the usual prayers, but words asking for peace, for forgiveness, for freedom. When 3:33 a.m. came, He saw the shadow again. It did not move. It did not kneel. It only stood, watching him. The candle beside it lit without a touch, and then the second one, the new one, flickered alive as well. Harris kept praying, tears running down his face, not from fear, but from the weight of something ancient and sorrowful filling the room. The figure stepped back, fading like mist into the air, and for the first time, the candle burned out on its own before dawn. After that night, the cameras never triggered again, the candle never relit, the chapel reopened, and no one ever saw the shadow again. But Harris kept the old footage, not to prove anything, not to scare anyone, just to remember, because sometimes, the dead do not want revenge or attention. Sometimes, they only want to be seen. To have someone acknowledge they were there, that they prayed, that they mattered, and when that finally happens, even a shadow can rest.